Chapter 16 of Man of Many Minds. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Man of Many Minds by E. Everett Evans. Chapter 16. The knowledge that these gurus of Algon were telepathic rocked George Hanlon back on his heels. That was a thing he had never even imagined. They were such a simple, almost childlike race that such an ability was farthest from his thoughts. "If you can talk with your minds," he asked Ghek in wonder, "why do you bother to speak with the voice to each other?" "Because mind talk more tiring to we," came the simple explanation. "It take much of we's forces. Us grow weak after much of them." "That makes me hesitate to ask you to do any of it then," the young Secret Service man said. "I was hoping you could find out for me how many minds are operated on the planet, and if all of them are using you gurus as slaves." "Oh, yes, Anyan, we know that already." Ghek's peculiar little face, which had become so friendly to Hanlon through long association, broke out into a smile that was quickly shadowed by sorrow at thought of the plight of his people. "There is 9 minds. Human masters make guru work in all of they." 9, eh? Hanlon thought swiftly for a moment. "Do they all produce the same ores as this one?" "We'll have to find that for you, Anyan. You wait short space of time." The greenie grew silent and strained with concentration. Hanlon probed into the native's mind, wondering if he could follow it, and haltingly at first, but without growing ability as he learned the pattern, he found he could ride along on the telepathic beam. The thoughts were too swift for him to catch more than an occasional concept, but he was thrilled to realize he was actually telepathing, even though at second hand. One after another mind he could feel joining in that conference. There was much hostility and great fear when Ghek first tried to explain about the human who was their friend and had learned to talk with them. The gurus on the other end of that line were tremendously skeptical, afraid, and very, very suspicious of the motives of any human being. But Ghek was eloquent and persuasive. Before long, their fears began to lessen, and later they seemed to accept his assurance that Anyan was indeed both friendly and anxious to help them escape their slavery. "The human Anyan is but one of the most of humans who are kind and just and ethical." He was surprised to hear Geek telepathing when he got so he could understand. "It is the few, such as those others who are here, who are not. These are bad men who come here just to get things for own selfish ends, and the good men, who are most, will stop them as soon as they can. Anyan came here just for that, to find out what those bad men do and to stop them." That speech was another shock to Hanlon. He had never told Ghek all that. The distant natives finally bowed to Ghek's importunings and gave him the specific information for which he was asking, because the friendly human wanted to know it. There were 2 other mines that produced that same uranite ore as the one at which Hanlon was stationed. There were 3 iron mines, and Hanlon was not too surprised to learn that at each of these mines smelters had been erected. He learned that humans were used mostly in the mills, the natives being used only for outside labor because they could not stand the heat. "We burn quickly," was the sad, horrified thought. There were 3 other mines, but the natives did not know the English or Greek names for the metals found there. Even after considerable questioning by the roundabout Hanlon to Ghek to the gurus back to Ghek back to Hanlon method, he could still get that specific information. "If it isn't tiring you too much, Ghek, please ask them if there is any building going on besides the smelters at the iron mines?" Hanlon requested. Soon other minds about the planet were coming in, and the story began to unfold. There were several factories making many machines, but none of the natives had the least idea what kind or for what purpose they were being made. "Think they are going to be put in great metal huts humans are making," one thought ran, and Hanlon quickly grabbed onto that. "What sort of metal huts?" "Things that look like huge eggs." "Spaceships, you mean?" Another thought broke in. "Yes, they like ships human come in, but much greater." Hanlon fumed. Oh, if only he could see. But wait, maybe he could get the information he needed. "Ask if anyone is looking at one of those eggs right now," he commanded Gek through the transformer. "Yes, Anyan. Many Gudu right at edge of great place of making. Brother of me, knock him there." "Ask him, please, to describe what he sees. Maybe that will give me a good picture of what it is." "Will be glad to try, but not knowing your language and having no compare your measurement to ours, am not sure can do what you wish," he felt Nock say. This too surprised Hanlon. That native certainly had a real mind to grasp that difficulty so well and to realize the limitations of telepathic communication with one alien to his race. "Please picture it in your mind as you see it, and use some common objects of the planet for comparison of their sizes," Hanlon urged through Gek's mind. "That way I think we can get along." Almost instantly, a picture of a gigantic egg formed in his mind, but with enough variations from an actual egg so that Hanlon realized it was indeed a spaceship the native was viewing. Soon Hanlon saw a great tree pictured beside the ship, and at the base of the tree a native was standing. Quickly, Hanlon estimated. The adult natives he had seen were almost all about 6 feet tall. As nearly as he could judge, that tree was just 15 times the height of the Gudu, and the ship was the same height as the tree, and nearly 3 times as long. Wow, what a ship! But it must be wrong. Even the largest core warships were nowhere near that huge. Nor were even any of the biggest freighters he had ever seen. He must be getting his measurements wrong. He called Gek, using the transformer. "Are you seeing what I am in Nock's mind?" "Yes, Anyan. And you is figure right. Is that big?" Hanlon slowly shook his head in amazement. If that was meant for a warship, it certainly spelled trouble for someone. He thought seriously for several moments, then telepathed Nock. "Is there more than one ship being built?" "Oh, yes. There are many, many." The picture built up of a whole row of ships, and Hanlon counted swiftly. 18. For what purpose was such a fleet being built? Men would not defy the ISC and the Federated Planets this way, merely for business reasons, he felt sure. There certainly was a plot being hatched. And what a plot! He felt Gek's hand on his arm and heard his voice. "Are 2 more places where humans build many ship, Anyan. While you think, me talk many minds. One place are 14 more great ones. At other are many, many, many small ones, 5 to 10 Gudu long." Shock on shock. Someone was building a tremendous fleet here. He must get that news to Corps headquarters as quickly as possible. If those ships were once finished, they would be able to dominate the system. For the Corps had only a nominal fleet. They had never needed a large one. To the best of his knowledge, the Corps had only 31 first-line battleships, much smaller than these. The fleet also had 55 heavy cruisers, 150 light cruisers, and 1,000 scouts running from 1-man up to 12-man size. Please find out if any of those ships they are building have ever left the ground. Some little ones only, Gek reported after a while. Some few disappear into sky, then come back after time, then do same again. Trial trips, or training trips for the crews, Hanlon deduced. Well, he had some data now at least, enough so that once he got that news to headquarters, they would attack this place in force great enough to stop this work, if he could get word to them soon enough. Let's see now, he figured quickly. I've been here almost 12 weeks. That means another 6 or 7 until I'm supposed to be eligible to get back to Simonides. Wish I knew how near finished those big battle wagons are. More moments of intense thought. I don't dare take the chance of trying to sneak off to the yards, he reasoned logically. I've got to do everything I can to make sure I get my trip back when my 18 weeks are up. If I got caught off bounds, that would ruin everything. I'd really be in a mess. Also, if he could get to the shipyards, the moment he was spotted trying to get inside any of those ships, he would undoubtedly be killed by guards who would certainly shoot first and ask questions later, if any. Nor were there any longer any native birds or animals left on Algon he could use. He had learned that the men had killed them off soon after they arrived. No, I'll just have to keep on trying and get what dope I can without exposing myself. With a month and a half, I should be able to get a lot more, and with what I already know, the Corps top brass will take steps but fast. Suddenly, a new idea sprang into his mind. Where was here? In his excitement and planning, he had entirely forgotten to finish figuring out that point. That evening after dinner, he stayed outside, ostensibly walking about aimlessly. In reality, looking at and studying the stars, when he was sure no one was watching him. He couldn't spot any of the more familiar constellations, such as Big Dipper, Bear, or the Southern Cross. He knew he was far to one side of the galaxy from Terra, that while from there one could see the front of those configurations. Now he would be getting a sidewise view, but he could identify quite a few of the bigger suns and distant nebulae. He picked out several blue, white, and red giants he was sure he knew. That was Andromeda off there. That one was undoubtedly Orion. No other contained so many 4.0 to 5.2 stars beside the gigantic Rigel, Betelgeuse, and Bellatrix. Good. He could fix all that in his mind well enough to draw it when he got back. And the Corps planetographers certainly would pinpoint this system from those directions. Distance. Let's see. He strained to remember the time it had taken that freighter to come here, and estimated that with its slower speed, this world was somewhere between 10 and 15 lights. He would time it more carefully going back, and estimate the ship's speed as closely as possible. Young George Hanlon was maturing swiftly under the stress of the tremendous task he was attempting. He was learning that he must think and plan well ahead of time. He realized he could not afford to make any serious mistakes, lest not only his task remain uncompleted, but his life be forfeit as well. He knew now that it was absolutely imperative that he get back to Simonides at the earliest possible moment, and that the way to be sure of this was to impress Philander, that he could feel duty-bound to give Hanlon his vacation at end of the minimum time. So Hanlon devoted many hours of serious thought to this problem, and finally figured out several courses of action. The next day, as soon as his shift was over, Hanlon walked across the compound and knocked on the door of the headquarters office. When he bade to enter, he did so, hat in hand. "Have you got a half hour or so to talk, Mr. Philander, sir?" he asked. "I've got a couple of ideas I'd like to gab with you about that I think might speed up production even more." The man looked up in surprise, and his eyes bored deeply, suspiciously, into Hanlon's. "You think you can tell me how to run my job?" he rasped. "Oh, no, sir, I didn't mean about the engineering or supervision. It's about handling the natives and getting more out of them. You said I was getting out more ore than the others, and I think perhaps I've got a few ideas. a sort of hunch about making the greenies themselves more productive." "Well, come in then. What is it?" "I've been doing a lot of thinking about greenies, sir. You remember I thought they were vegetable matter? And the way they feed themselves, they'd need ground that either has lots of natural chemicals in it or that has been well fertilized to keep them well and strong. That being the case, the dirt that forms the floors of their huts and stockades would very quickly become exhausted of those vital chemicals, and the natives would begin suffering from malnutrition, it seems to me. My gang has been slowing down recently, although they still seem to be trying as hard as ever." Why, why, yes." The superintendent's eyes had widened in surprise as Hanlon talked. "That makes sense. Imagine none of us thinking of that. But then, we've always thought of them merely as dumb beasts. So I've been wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea either to move the stockades every month or so, or else let the natives feed out in the open jungle every day. The sunlight would probably help them too, being vegetable. They could be tied together and guarded, of course, so they couldn't escape." Philander slumped down into his chair in deep thought, and Hanlon glowed inwardly with the hope that something would come of this plan. It would help him with Philander, if it worked. Also, it would help the Gurus, for Ghek had often grown almost hysterical when complaining about the terrible hunger they all felt so continuously. Suddenly, Philander sat erect. "I believe we've got a few sacks of commercial nitrates in the storehouse. Let's experiment and see if they can use that." He rose purposely from his desk, and the two hurried to one of the warehouses. There, Philander soon found the sacks of chemical, and Hanlon carried one as they went to the corral. "May we try it on my crew first, sir?" he asked anxiously. "They seem to sort of like me, and I've learned more or less how to guess their reactions by their facial movements, so I think I could tell whether or not they like it." "Sure, that's a good idea." And they went on to the compound that housed Hanlon's special crew. Inside, while Hanlon apparently chose at random, it was actually Ghek to whom he beckoned. When the native approached, feigning fear and reluctance, Hanlon hit a sudden grin at Ghek's unexpected acting brilliance. The young man opened the sack and poured out a little of the nitrate. He stooped over and stuck his finger into the stuff, then rose and gestured to Ghek to put his feeding fingers into it the same way. Meanwhile, Hanlon was telepathing the exact information to his friend as best he could with his limited ability. Gingerly, Ghek stooped, and after a few false starts, finally put one of his fingers into the little pile of nitrate and activated the feeding sensories. For a few moments he stood thus, doubtfully. Then his manner clearly indicated joy and surprised happiness. He began working that little triangular-shaped mouth, and the others crowded closer. Telepathically, he informed Hanlon that this was wonderful, exactly the food element the natives needed so desperately. "It seems to think it's all okay," Hanlon said aloud to Philander. "I'll spread out a little more for them all." And without waiting for permission, he made a long, narrow pile of the fertilizer clear across the width of the hut. Instantly, the rest of the natives crowded along that line and stuck their feeding fingers into it. Soon, their silly-looking faces expressed their equivalent of blissful smiles of complete satisfaction, and Hanlon's mind was suffused with thoughts of pleasure and gratitude for his kindness. End of chapter 16.